Welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and I am very excited to welcome a great group of panelists to this discussion of tribal broadband and update on tribal broadband. Before I introduce our guests, though, I just want to say a little bit about Broadband Breakfast and some upcoming activities. In fact, we have a very significant event happening tomorrow here in Washington, D.C., where Broadband Breakfast is based, where I'm based. It is the Big Tech and Speech Summit. Hopefully, if you are part of our Broadband Breakfast community, you've seen some news about it. If you haven't, please go to broadbandbreakfast.com, and at the very right-hand side, click on Conferences. You can find all about the Big Tech and Speech Summit. As anyone who hasn't been under a rock knows, the tech industry is kind of in the crosshairs of many in Washington. And it's kind of ironic because for a long time, you know, the greater ability to have high-speed internet access, to have higher capacity broadband sort of went hand in hand with the tech industry. But now we see a lot of kind of positivity around broadband and better capacity broadband, but we see a lot of negative attention and discussions around big tech. And by big tech, we're obviously talking about the biggest technology companies, the Amazons, the Facebooks or Metas, the Googles, and Apple, Microsoft. So this raises a number of important policy questions, including questions for those of us at Broadband Breakfast who kind of care about and believe in what we call better broadband, better lives, and the importance of getting higher capacity broadband. At our program tomorrow at Clyde's of Gallery Place, and to attend, we hope you will register and attend. The summit is $299, but if you'd like to attend, just make sure to email me or anyone on our team at Broadband Breakfast, and we'll get you the flash code to be able to participate in that. And we will be also selling registrations for a webinar that is available, and you can register at the same place that you register for at the event. And we have the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee focused on this topic, who will be giving our keynote speech at 8:45 in the morning at Clyde's tomorrow. And then we're going to be followed by 4 panels, one on the big picture on big tech, one on the fragility of Section 230 of the Telecom Act that addresses the issue of liability for user-generated content. And then we'll be having a session on privacy and one on competition antitrust. And scattered among, we have some big thinkers like Ellie Noem, like John Samples of the Oversight Board for Facebook, and Adam Connor, one of the very first Facebook employees in Washington, who is now a very strong critic of big tech. So that's just a little taste of what's to come tomorrow at our Big Tech and Speech Summit. Here on Broadband Breakfast Live Online, our free program, which we hold every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern. We're actually coming next week on our 3-year anniversary of offering free programming on Broadband Breakfast. We started with the pandemic, so easy way to know when the pandemic started, when Broadband Breakfast Live Online started, because we gathered people together as a way to make sure that we could stay connected. And I would, dare to say that it's really because of the pandemic that there is such a strong interest in this moment in high capacity broadband everywhere across this country, right? In rural, in urban, in tribal country, which of course we'll be talking about today. These are the things that everyone's talking about. And just a quick example, again, go to Broadband Breakfast and free events. You can see all of our upcoming programs. We're going to be talking next week about broadband in a region of the country, hopefully the Delta region. We're going to be talking about robocalls, stir-shaken, and the future of voice telephony the following week. We'll be talking about compliance requirements for broadband deployment on March, and then state digital equity plans. This is just a guide to a short guide to some of the upcoming events that you can see and participate in. And I do want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors. We wouldn't be able to do our free programming every Wednesday without our sponsors. They include Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Nokia, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, Lightbox, Wireless Infrastructure Association, Geo Partners, Ookla, Michael Baker International, Bitstream Communications, Inc., Positron Access, the California Emerging Technology Fund, and Broadband Toolkit. Thank you to our sponsors, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do this programming that brings so many people in the broadband community together. Well, with that, let me go ahead and open it up to our three panelists. And I know some of you, maybe all of you, are really kind of zooming in from parts of the country that do not have great connectivity. So thank you for making the effort to be here and be part of this discussion. For our status update on tribal broadband today, we're going to be hearing first from Joe Valandra. Joe is the president and CEO of Tribal Ready, and Tribal Ready is a newly founded company, but Joe has certainly been around the block quite a lot. In fact, he has more than 25 years of executive level experience in public, private, government, and nonprofit sectors, including an extensive background in tribal economic development. So we're going to hear a little bit about Tribal Ready, what it is, and where it's going, and how it fits into the broadband landscape for tribal nations in the United States. Following Joe, we're going to hear from Dr. Jim Trumbley. Thank you for being with us, Jim. He leads, and I'm not going to say this right, so you might as well just say it for me, Jim.
Wajaji Connect.
Wajaji Connect. All right. So Wajaji Connect brings more than 40 years of experience into the information technology field. And you have also served on the faculty at the University of Oklahoma and the University of Texas at El Paso, and has worked in a number of technology organizations. So we're really excited to hear about Wajaji Connect and how it is working in tribal country. And then batting cleanup, we're going to hear from Denise May. Denise is the administrator of the native village of Port Lions in Settlers Cove, which is 19 air miles west of Kodiak, Alaska. So that's way out there, at least as I understand it. I haven't had the privilege to be out to anywhere in Alaska, but certainly that part. But Denise, we're going to really look forward to hearing about your experience, what you're doing in the native village of Port Lions, and how you're helping this federally recognized tribe that was established, I guess, about 45 years ago, with a base roll of 225 members, but is now more than 400. So thank you to each of you for being with us. Let's turn it over to you, Joe, to set the stage for our discussion, and then we'll hear from James and Denise.
All right, thank you, Joe. I'm very happy to be here this afternoon and have a chance to talk about what's happening in Indian country, and to be on the same panel with James and Denise. They bring very unique perspectives, and they're doing great things in their communities. So I'll take up just a little bit of time to give the audience a little more background on what Tribal Ready is and what we're trying to do, and frame an issue that I think is probably the most important issue right now as it relates to tribal broadband and its funding. But Tribal Ready's mission, we were founded. We've grown out of the Tribal Ready team has grown out of a variety of different backgrounds and places, but all focused on telecommunications and in specific broadband. We were founded or began working in January of this year with the mission of advancing tribal sovereignty. I'm a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe from South Dakota. As Drew said, I've been working in and around Indian country for most of my career, over 45 years. I hate to admit, but it's been that long. And the advancing tribal sovereignty is the core of our mission. Now we're doing that with an eye towards focused on bringing broadband, true high-speed broadband to as much of Indian country as possible, hopefully all of it. But we have also, in keeping with that mission and in keeping with being a native-owned company, we're owned and controlled by a group of native individuals. Our focus is solely on native issues and the broadband marketplace. But we have chosen, and I think this is important, I'm only going to digress in this for just a second, that we've chosen to organize ourselves under Delaware law as a public benefits corporation. And what that means basically is under that law, we have the ability to balance both the value that we bring to our shareholders, but equal balance the impact that we have on society. We think that's in keeping with our mission. It's in keeping with our native focus, and it also makes us a little unique in the marketplace. I guess just to make sure that I leave as much time, because I'm one of those guys, you put a nickel in and you get $5, and I'll try not to do that. The key issue for us today, I mean, we do. Let me just. I'm sorry, Drew. I'm trying to focus my brain here. Tribal Ready can take a broadband project from 0 to 100. It means if you need us to evaluate what type of broadband you need, or what services need to be part of that broadband, through the mapping process, through the network design process, the grant applications, the deployment of the network that is ultimately funded, and the operations of those networks. So we have the experience and background and technical capabilities to do all of that. Just that gives context to where we are. But I want to focus on the key issue for us right now. In fact, it's the real motivating factor for us now. As most people on this call know, sometime soon, at the end of May or June, NTI is going to allocate BEAD funds, $42.5 billion to the states. They've been required by law to take into consideration, to a large degree, the mapping being done by the FCC, the fabric, if you will. And what we've found is that the fabric, although it hasn't entirely left Indian country out, it has misrepresented a great deal of Indian country as being designated as served or otherwise left off the map. What that means is that the allocations that NTA will be making to the states that have large concentrations of tribes, in them Oklahoma, Alaska are two good examples, but South Dakota, Montana, North Dakota, Arizona, Nevada, and others, California. If Indian country is not accurately represented as being unserved, which intuitively and empirically most of it is unserved, then states will be shortchanged on the allocations that they should receive from NTI, because those funds are meant to be focused on unserved areas. This is the fundamental and the simplest way to encapsulate what the issue is. So we've launched a project that we call the Virtual Tribal Broadband Office to help tribes across the country, in all 50 states, to gather empirical data and other information. So like theoretically, to announce or to advance a challenge to the FCC mapping is too late for that. Probably not going to make much difference, honestly. So we want to gather this data so that tribes can have the empirical data they need to advocate both with the NTAI in conjunction with their home state, if they choose, to make sure the allocations from NTI are as accurate as possible and reflect the unserved nature of Indian country. And further, to work with the state broadband offices in all the individual states, so that as the states make their sub-grants, their sub-allocations, if you will, that they're based on reality. They're based on the reality of Indian country. We think that's incredibly important. So we're doing all we can to help with that. The Virtual Tribal Broadband Office, go to our website, tribalready.com. You'll see a great explanation of it and a way to participate. And one final thing that is in keeping with our mission and our view of Indian country and tribal sovereignty, and then I'll stop, is we are advocating and putting into practice things that protect tribal data sovereignty. And what that means is that tribes will have control of their data. The data we collect is not ours. The data we collect will be segregated and be under the control of each individual tribe that participates, and the tribes will decide how and by whom that data will be used. And that's just the beginning. That scratches the surface of data of tribal data sovereignty, but it's certainly one of the key components in this area that strengthens tribal sovereignty and makes sure that tribes are in control of their destiny going forward. So thank you, Drew. That was a mouthful, but I wanted to squeeze all that in. So.
No, thank you. And I put in the chat window for those who are joining us through Zoom. We're also available on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. But it's a link to an article that was published just a few weeks back about Tribal Ready's launch, and based on an interview I did with Joe and others. And it raises some of these points. There's a couple other questions that we touched on that I'm going to come back to, but let's give Jim and Denise a chance to offer their thoughts on kind of, again, the status update. And by status update, we're kind of like in the midst of, there's a tribal broadband program, but there's also the BEAD program. And we want to kind of understand how tribes can be a part of or have been a part of both of those and maybe others, right? So that's certainly something we want to discuss. But Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your company and the current state of the marketplace, if you will, or the nation place of tribal broadband.
Well, okay. Well, thank you very much, Drew. And first of all, I'm not with a company. I'm with the Osage Nation. I'm the director for Wajaji Connect, and Wajaji is actually what we call ourselves, and Osage is a modification that the French made of Wajaji, and so that's how we came up with Osage. But Wajaji is the Osage Nation. We're a federally recognized tribe. We recently, in August, received from NTIA, from the TBCP program, and then also from USDAR, US Reconnect 3, we received a total of $54.5 million for our broadband project. We have since applied for middle mile and Reconnect 4, and we're planning on hopefully being involved with the state of Oklahoma's submission for the BEAD program. With NTIA and the program we got $40.6 million that we got awarded, and $13.9 million from the USDAR US program for Reconnect 3. Between those two grants, we're going to deploy over 200 miles of fiber optic middle mile, and we're going to connect fiber to the home for the native households within our reservation, which was defined as Osage County, the entirety of Osage County, which is the largest county in the state of Oklahoma. We're also going to stand up 16 tower locations, which are 190-foot towers, which will provide fixed Wi-Fi throughout, also through our service area. And so it's a big project we're working on. And we're looking for the BEAD program to assist us in funding additional service areas, and hopefully to allow us to hook up non-native households. And as Joe was saying, the BEAD program is obviously, I think most people probably know, the BEAD program is the tribes are subrecipients to the state of to the states. And with us, it's the state of Oklahoma. We, like you said, we have NTA currently, I think, has awarded, I'm not 100% certain, but I think it was 39 tribes inside the state of Oklahoma. So it's pretty big footprint. And the state of Oklahoma, unfortunately, has been kind of lagging behind as far as trying to get the ball rolling and get their feet under there, and they've just recently established the Broadband Council, and they're starting to work on pulling that together. So we're a little behind the 8 ball. We're hoping that we can be an active participant in developing the BEAD application and get that submitted pretty quick. We have, and the state of Oklahoma also has submitted our letter of intent up front. So that's kind of what we're working on. The BEAD, or excuse me, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, the TBCP program, and the Reconnect 4. Most of our projects will go all the way from the western boundary to the eastern boundary of Osage County, and then from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, which is the Osage Nation's capital, we'll go south all the way down to Tulsa. We're also going to take and we're planning on reposition or reutilizing a casino that we had that has been operational, and they're building a new one that's closer to Bartlesville, and we're going to take that casino, and it's got a raised floor. It's already got generators and fiber optics and things like that. We're going to make that into a data center. That's the intent as part of this effort as well. So we're really excited about it. We think we'll have a really good footprint and be able to provide the Osage people with high-speed fiber optics to the home, and for the more distant houses and residents and businesses, a high-speed fixed Wi-Fi presence. So
thank you. Thanks for giving us that perspective, and important to highlight, how Wajaji is a kind of an outgrowth or of the tribe, or tribal owned in its entirety, right? So we'll talk more about kind of how entities like Wajaji have been serving tribes, and what's needed kind of to get us to the next level. So thank you. Let's turn to Denise, and Denise, thank you for joining us. You're obviously coming to us with a different name on your tag there, but tell us a little about yourself and about the tribal area that you serve in the native village of Port Lions. Can you hear me, Jill? Denise? You're on mute.
I don't think that's Denise. I'm not sure that she's joined.
Okay.
So.
Okay. My apologies. I was expecting that we had our third guest, but since we don't, let's continue with the two of you. So tell us a little bit about what I just said, Jim, about Wajaji and it is 100% tribal owned entity. Tell us a little bit about its history and it's also its future, Jim.
Okay, well, Wajaji Connect is a department within the executive branch of the Osage Nation. Our Constitution divides us up into 3 branches of government: the legislative, the Congress, the executive branch, and then the courts. And within that, then Congress and the executive branch jointly work together to appoint LLCs for economic development and for running business activities. Wajaji Connect is not an LLC. It is part of the executive branch. It is part of the government itself. And what we're doing is we're taking conceptually, and the way I explain it to a lot of our leadership and other interested parties within the Osage Nation, is it's kind of like an apartment complex, and the fact that what we're doing is we're building the apartment complex. We're building doing the construction and building it right now, and there's no money no profit in building it, just like there's no profit in building a apartment complex. But once it gets built, then you need to turn it over to the property manager, and the property manager is the one that gets people to the renters in, sign the leases, collect the rent payments, do the troubleshooting, do the maintenance. All that stuff is the operations part of it. And so we're focused right now in building it. The infrastructure will be built by the Osage Nation. It will be owned by the Osage Nation. And we're struggling to some degree as to how best to do the operations component once we're finished the construction and the build. How do we turn that over and make that, you know, a working, functional part of the environment and a service that we provide to the Osage people? The you know, the difficulty is that in the public's mind, broadband's broadband, right? They don't delineate or differentiate between the construction and the operation, although they're wholly separate and different functions and wholly separate different skill sets and people and all that stuff. You know, if the operation is not done, I don't care if you have the world's best infrastructure laid out,
right?
People are still going to say, "Oh, broadband sucks." You know, they're going to say this is terrible. You know, and they just lump it all together. So you have to do both sides very, very well, and in order to make it pull off and be a perception and a perceived reality for the people that it's a successful endeavor. So that's what we're working on right now.
Joe, what would you add to this discussion that Jim has added, right? Which is what's the role currently and the future role now that we see the first, I guess, in my view, really substantial federal investment in tribal broadband? If you know, with the I guess it was $1 or $2 billion, and then that was supplemented with the $3 billion in the tribal broadband fund. And now, you know, Joe, you and I have talked about how important it is for tribes to go after funding in BEAD, the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, in addition to the tribal connectivity, because of the extreme need in tribal country for broadband. What role do you see? And you know what? Just as I say that, our third panelist, Denise, has just entered the room, so we'll give her a moment to position herself and turn your video camera on, Denise, when you're in the room. We want to hear your story. But Joe, why don't you just tackle that question I asked of you, which was building off of Jim's comments just there.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. I think Jim laid out one of the key issues after funding is not only do you have to build it, but you have to operate it. You have to make it run efficiently and sustainably. And I think that's one of the both of those are challenges that come once the infrastructure is built. The infrastructure build is no small event itself in and of itself. It's a major undertaking just to build the infrastructure. So that's why in many ways the BEAD funding is as important as the TCP, not only because it's a lot more money in the pot, but it will help with the sustainability, making sure that the operations and the infrastructure are finished in a way that they're operationally efficient. And that's certainly one of the functions of Tribal Ready, is to evaluate that, help with that operations and ongoing sustainability. And a big component of that, which I'm sure Jim is facing, or at least planning to face, fairly soon, is workforce development. The objective of Indian country in general, certainly Tribal Ready in particular, is to help train community members, tribal community members primarily, but other community members, so they can work locally, work at home with good paying jobs that help operate, maintain, service the networks that are being built. That's another challenge that is part of the operational challenge, but it's also part of the deployment challenge. So I guess I'll wrap it up and to give Denise a chance to talk about Alaska, which is a unique interesting and wholly so again, a unique place to be building out a broadband project. But that's what we're focused on, Drew, and I think Jim laid it out pretty well. And we're focused on all those issues too. But to catch on one final thing, the BEAD program is important because, as I said before, it's targeted to unserved areas. Tribes tend to be more often than not unserved or underserved, certainly. And $3 billion through the ACP is a good start, but it's not nearly enough. So tribes need to get their fair, justifiable share of the BEAD funds to help build out these networks. I can't emphasize that enough. But go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, Denise, thank you for being with us. If you could unmute yourself, we'd appreciate it. And I'm going to just spotlight you so everyone gets a chance to see your view, the view from your window, so to speak. So Denise, we want to hear from you. Can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what the situation for tribal broadband is like up there in the native village of Port Lions, west of Kodiak? Go ahead, Denise.
Good morning. I am not going to, it's early morning here. First, let me apologize. I had thought that the meeting would be at noon Alaska time.
Yes.
So I'm a little off and I'm not ready for my day yet.
Well,
so you're going to see my ceiling.
okay. Well, we'll go ahead and turn the view to everyone, but can you continue to speak for a few minutes here, Denise?
Oh, absolutely. Let me just, I am the administrator for the Native Village of Port Lions on Kodiak Island. It's a village on the north end of Kodiak Island. We are very happy to have received a grant from the NTIA to bring broadband to 6 communities. Alaska and the size of its villages are small. So in order to get enough participants to meet the requirements of the grant, we included 5 other villages in the Gulf of Alaska in our proposal. This is going to bring us the opportunity to compete at the national level for some of the funding that helps our communities and our people. I've been involved in my Native community for the past 35 years. And I tell you, the other day we were having a conversation about how years ago, when everything went through the snail mail, we received the applications for the programs that were being offered federally just barely before they were due. So we were unable to participate with at the level that you could there, because we had a shorter time frame, not only to get program grants in for our communities, but on the front end of getting it late, but getting it back in time.
Yes.
So as you know, the internet has closed that gap a little bit, but if we don't have access to it, it does us no good. So that's really what Alaska needs, is to close the gap on the internet. And once we've received this, the BEADS program that Drew was just talking about is something I'm interested in, to protect the identity of the people and make sure that we have solid cybersecurity through adoption and use. So once we're already starting to talk about that, once we get past this first phase of getting the internet into our community. So,
well, we're gonna let's broaden it out to all of our panelists just now. But let me just ask one more quick question of you, Denise, which is, what is the state of connectivity where you are right now? Obviously, and thank you for being on. We recognize it's 8 o'clock there, right? 7 o'clock in Hawaii. We try to do this program at noon so we can comfortably get all of the time zones in, but we know there's a sacrifice for our Alaskan and Hawaiian watchers. But thank you for being here with us. Just what is connectivity like right now? Obviously, we're speaking, and that's great, right? But no one should be, misled to think that because one can do a Zoom call, there's good connectivity. But do tell us what it is like. What's your experience of connectivity in the native village of Port Lions?
Well, we once we received our NTIA grant, it seemed like Starlink jumped right on the bandwagon and came in, and so a lot of people are connecting to Starlink now.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are still breaks in the service, and so we're looking forward to something a little stronger. There are days that we're down, so we can't. Well, we just can't get online to do business at all. So the cell service is spotty. Everybody's trying to figure out the best cell company that might have a tower that works most of the time. It's definite isolation.
Right. Well, Joe, what are some of your thoughts? You've clearly had a lot of experience engaging with many other tribes in addition to your work with the Rosebud Sioux tribe. What is your perspective? I mean, again, if one can make a general statement of the state of connectivity, or at least the issue set for improving connectivity in tribal lands.
Sure, I'll start off and say that Denise's issues with connectivity, she'd be like a stellar example of connectivity in Indian country in general, in that she has it sometimes. She has it maybe most of the time. Most of Indian country doesn't have great connectivity at all. If they have an internet connection, it's an old internet connection through copper, perhaps more often than not, some version of wireless that isn't very fast. They've been suffering. I'll use Rosebud, but then I will generalize a little bit more, that suffering with really less than dial-up speeds for the most part. So, and that's true for tribes in Nevada, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, some parts of Arizona, Northern California, and certainly most of Alaska doesn't even have dial-up speeds, doesn't even have any kind of real connectivity that we would think of at all. And the impact that is massive. I mean, as Denise described, on those days where she doesn't have good connectivity or none, you can't upload or download files and if a large file is attempted to be delivered, it oftentimes doesn't even show up, or it takes hours to download just a simple PDF document. But most of the time there is none, or it's so slow that it's just rudimentary. So tribes tend to rely when they can on the cell service, because the cell service is faster, but that's not a reliable source either. So I guess to generalize, Drew, I would say that Indian country, in the broadest sense, doesn't have connectivity that any of us would appreciate. It's very minimal, and that's why these programs are so important, why the funding levels have to be as high as possible, just to help bring people back into modern society so they can communicate the way that they choose to. It's a massive need, it's a massive lift, and people like Jim and Denise are on the forefront of trying to make that lift.
Jim, tell us your thoughts on this question, both specific to your tribe and work with Wajaji, but also with other tribes, if you have that experience, Jim.
Well, this is my first and really only experience with the tribe. I was working as a senior project manager with EDS on the MCI WorldCom a long time ago. And pretty much all of my experience, in 40 years has led me to this point. And then I retired and, moved to Pawhuska, the Osage Nation capital. And I had two thoughts of when I retired of moving here. One was I wanted to immerse myself in the Osage culture and learn more about my own heritage and culture, which I've done. And the second thing was I wanted to get back to the Osage people. I was thinking at the time that would be through education and my role as a college professor. But given my background, when we got these grants, the chief kind of went, "Hey, come here." So I'm kind of starting first time working in Indian country, doing this. But I would echo everything that Joe said. I think he was 100% correct. If you look at within the Osage Reservation, within Osage County, you'll find pockets of connectivity. Pawhuska itself has some connectivity through coax and through definitely DSL lines and copper. Some of the other big towns like Skytook, up by Bartlesville, on the outside of Bartlesville, which is just outside of Osage County, they have some, and Ponca City has built a very good broadband that they've grown as a public utility. But generally, most of Osage County is underserved at best, and they're relying on, like you said, copper or satellite, and on some occasions fixed Wi-Fi. And what we're doing is coming in and providing fiber optics to the home. Plus, we're doing, some high-speed fixed Wi-Fi as well. So we're looking at doing, greatly exceeding the 20 and 3 that is now thought of as being underserved. If you're below 20 and 3, on up to 100, or on the fiber optic cases, gigabits up and down. So we think there's just so many benefits for the Osage people of having this capability and this infrastructure in place. We're looking at enhanced telemedicine. We're looking at better education, remote education, which COVID definitely showed us the importance of that. We're also looking at a lot of things relative to our culture, language, culture classes on how to make, Osage traditional dress, finger weaving, ribbon work, and things like that as well. Plus cooking, food is so important for the Osage people as far as a way of learning our culture and proceeding and propagating our historical knowledge, of us. So all of this, is going to come together, and it's going to allow the Osage people, what we like to say is we're going to enable our ancestors to connect with our descendants.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. Thank you. Denise, would you like to add some additional thoughts on sort of and I know you alluded to several of these here, or at least the efforts there, but could you just speak to what are your hopes for how your tribe will potentially be able to participate in the BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, and some of the issues for tribes that you see, Denise?
Well, now that I'm listening to some of the other speakers, I'm thinking it would be nice to have any line to the homes. What we rely on is satellite for the most part here. There are a few local phone companies that have provided internet at lower packages, not even unlimited packages of $500 and more in our community. So cost affordability is number one. bringing that affordability to all the communities so that every home can have connectivity for the ability to access, whether it's Social Security or other departments. There are days in Port Lions where we won't have a plane for a week or times. And so our only way to communicate is through our phones or online. And just being able to do appointments, whether it's medical or other appointments, telemedicine is so important to rural Alaska as well. So there's those opportunities, and also just teaching our people the ability to use the internet and how it will work in our communities.
Right. Thank you for these thoughts, Denise and Jim. I want to go back to Joe for a moment. Joe, when we spoke for the article, we talked a little bit about the amount of funds that really is appropriate to go to tribal nations. And we had this conversation about a $5 billion number. This is 5 billion of the 42.5, or more than 10%. And you said in that interview that, it's a rough calculation you did based upon the priority being unserved individuals and based upon this gaping lack of availability in Indian country. And you've elaborated on that a little bit here, but I want to come back specifically to the importance of data and mapping and the Tribal Broadband Office. Talk to me and our audience, and please, our audience, if you'd like to weigh in. We've got a great, obviously very informed group of individuals in the tribal community who are active on the ground in this issue. So for those who have questions, and thank you for being here, everyone, please feel free to offer them. We still have a little bit of time left. So Joe, what's your reaction on this question of how we get to the right amount of BEAD funding for tribal nations?
Well, as I alluded to before, Drew, and thank you for the question, because I said this is one of Tribal Ready's highest priorities right now, is to make sure that the Indian country gets its fair share, its just share of the BEAD funding at a minimum. But because it's the largest pot, it's the one that we're focused on right now. As I said before to you in our interview, we looked at all the unserved areas that we knew of as a percentage of unserved overall in the country. Again, just based on the data that we had at the time. And frankly, we landed on 5 billion. We think it could have been a lot more, but we didn't want to, scare anybody or to overstate what the situation is. But data is the key to this. The allocations to be made by NTIA, regardless if they just rely on the FCC fabric or if they take other data, other sources into account, is going to be 99% a data-driven decision. How many unserved areas are there in a given state as a proportion to the overall population of the state, and then allocate funds that way. And right now, because tribes have been, for all intents and purposes, left off the fabric as a true representation of unserved. Again, as I said before, the states are going to be underallocated as it relates to tribes, and tribes' ability to get their fair share from a state when the real numbers are presented to the state will be a challenge too. So we're doing everything we can to help tribes gather the data. We're using speed tests and other parameters, location specific, and we have a survey that goes along with those speed tests, so we can identify clearly what the usage is, what the household is like, and some other demographic information that can be melded into and be put in perspective for each tribe. And I want to emphasize again, each tribe will decide how this is used, but we will then have the ability, if the tribe wants us to do a map, a very detailed map of the unserved areas in their area. We can aggregate that for an entire state so that no specific addresses are released, but that data can be used then to advocate at the NTIA, at the FCC ultimately, and certainly with the states, so that the allocations that are made are as fair and just as possible as it relates to Indian country. That's the issue. And it is data driven, as you said. We've got to gather the data to make this work properly. And that's what we're driven to do right now.
Awesome. Thank you. The questions are beginning to pour in. We'll turn to you. Jim. But let me bring out this question of actually, go ahead, Jim, if you want to weigh in on this point.
Well, I was just going to echo what Joe has said, and being in the state of Oklahoma, sometimes the tribe's relationships with the state government is contentious at times. And we're very concerned that the tribes in the state of Oklahoma are going to be able to get proper representation and proper funding and as sub recipients to the state. So we're trying to work with some of the other tribes and form almost a coalition, I guess, if you will, to try to work together to and do the exact same things Joe was just talking about.
Awesome. Some great questions pouring in. 3 of them here. Let me read one this is from Scott Dinsmore, also of Tribal Ready. He asks for Denise, does every home in Port Lions have an identifiable address? If not, how do you manage that? And then he adds, we know that in many cases, there is no physical address for the residential, but rather a PO box or central hub. And the ability to measure service levels at the home is critical. So Denise, do you want to address that question?
Yeah, we do have addresses in Port Lions. Our mail comes through box numbers. However, we do have addresses here, and if there is not a physical address, street in house number, we have plots through the borough that identify the piece of property.
Okay. So do you know the status of how that has been used, or do you know whether any of that information has been submitted as part of the broadband fabric, Denise?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. As in our grant specifically, all the homes have been identified through that way.
Okay.
Say, Drew, if I could just jump in for
please.
a second on the address issue. You know, in many of the western states in particular that cover, hundreds, maybe thousands of square miles, there aren't necessarily specific addresses, which has been part of the problem. So we're working hard to try to find a vehicle that will allow for an address specific data point. I guess is probably the best way to put it without going into more detail. And we think that there's a possibility, and I'm throwing this out there really as much for discussion as for a viable idea. But as you know, there are Google Plus codes that identify specific structures or specific locations anywhere in the world, and that they may have potential to be an address of a specific location to tie to a speed test or other type of testing for service levels. But one thing we're not sure about them is if they'll respect tribal data sovereignty or not.
Right.
And so I throw it out there both as an idea and probably a challenge to figure this out.
We've got another question from Teresa Taylor. Do you have a position paper that tribes should send to NTIA, FCC, and elected officials on the issues of the FCC mapping and served areas of tribes in regards to the BEAD program distribution to the states, which will eventually be distributed to tribes? So great question from Teresa. Who would like to tackle that question?
I would be happy to. We have a presentation that describes the issue in pretty straightforward, understandable language that will, as more data is collected, turn into a white paper for presentation to and for use by the tribes. So we want to facilitate and help tribes have the data and information they need to advocate for it at NTIA, at FCC, at the state level. But I do have a presentation that lays out the basic issues, and Drew, I'll share that with you so that your users can look at it as
Absolutely. We'll put it on the page for this event. So how you registered for this or are watching this event, future people will be able to watch this event. We have another great question here. This one came to me directly, so I'll just read it, but feel free to put more in the chat window if you'd like. This person says that we are a small incumbent ISP with plans in place to build a fiber to the home network in Osage County as well, obviously where you are, Jim. Will NTIA grants somehow supersede our USDA Reconnect 1 grant to build to these areas on the western edge of Osage Nation and south of Pawhuska? Or how will the deconflicting process flesh out as you see it today? Love your thoughts, Jim, particularly, but also everyone on our discussion panel. Jim, feel free to turn your video back on so we can see you. And
I have a comment regarding that.
Okay, go ahead.
What I'm going to tell you is our project with NTIA has a USDA grant that was already awarded, but our community wasn't included. So we just spidered off their that particular grant. So adding communities with NTIA. So there's a way to put the two together for those communities not connected.
Okay. Jim, do you want to tackle that too?
Yeah, sure. The NTA grants, one of the things that they do is they look and see what is already funded, and that's excluded from funding for current and future grants. So if you had an RUS, USDA RUS Reconnect 1 grant for an area, probably, depending upon speeds and what was delivered, that would probably be excluded from some of the fiber to the home components that we got funded. Now, I was trying to see in the chat where the question was, but I didn't see that. So I was trying to get some of the detailed and specifics.
It was a question that was sent to me. So I'll just copy and paste the question, which I've already read.
Okay.
And if you have some additional thoughts, here's what I like to do. I'd like to, we're just 3 minutes away from and we like to start on time and end on time. Let's hear from Denise, any final thoughts you have on what tribes need now or need next. Okay. And then let's hear from Jim, if you have any final thoughts, and then Joe will give you the last word on what tribes should do next on broadband deployment. Go ahead, Denise.
So if you haven't reached out and applied for the construction, that's the first step, right? Is getting the construction in place. Well, this huge opportunity through the federal government is coming at us. And then secondly, making sure that your community is educated on fiber security, to how to use the equipment so they're able to actually benefit from it when your project is completed. So that would be my thoughts. And if you're a small community, reach out to smaller communities around you, because you have to have so many households. And that's how we were able to be successful in Alaska with our small communities, is building larger groups together to get to be able to work together on the project. So I guess that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you. Jim, any final thoughts and any final reactions to that question?
Whoever posted that, I encourage him to give me a call. We can figure out some way to work together to get better coverage for our entire, for the Osage County and the Osage people. One of the requirements of grants coming in, if new grant applications come in, they're going to ask the Osage Nation for authorization to use that or give the grant for that area within our reservation. So it's set on the western edge of Osage County. So yeah, I don't know if it's in Pawnee County or and spills over or something like that. But anyway, Yeah, we'd
Well-
be happy to talk and work about it, but yeah, there's that this deconflicting is going to have to happen, because it's going to, and that's big. That's why it's so important to do the FCC, the mapping tool that Joe was referring to.
Well, and that one of the things we're trying to do in this this weekly event is to bring people together like this. So feel free to email me if you'd like to be kind of connected, and we'll make sure to share all this information. This video will be instantly available. Joe, give us your final thoughts on the issues right now and going forward for tribal broadband.
Well, I've already talked about the need to gather the data so tribes can advocate and get their fair share of BEAD and other funding. But I'd like to hold out Jim and Osage and Denise and Port Lions as an example of communities owning their own infrastructure at the end of the day. If tribes have one objective out of this at the end, in order to control their destiny, they need to own the infrastructure, own the operations. Now, granted, they may have partners in that process, but they needs to be tribally controlled at the end of the day. Otherwise, we're just back to where we started with a number of incumbents providing service that may not meet the needs of the community. So I can't emphasize enough that at the end of the day, after all this investment by the federal government, all this effort by the tribes and the other communities, that tribes need to be in control at the end of the day. So thank you, Drew, for having us here. I really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you, Joe, as well as Jim and Denise for being part of our discussion. Don't forget to sign up for the Big Tech and Speech Summit tomorrow. If you're in Washington, feel free to sign up to attend in person. If you're not and would like to, we have the webinar availability. And once again, we will be back next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. On behalf of our panel, Joe Valandra, Jim Trumbley, I hope I got that right, and Denise May. I'm Drew Clark, and we'll see you next week.